which is mentioned in the book, the folkish state, which is in reference to the German policy. The footnotes in the book are in this specific edition, are almost necessary here. They're very good. That I will say about the book. They do provide several footnotes regarding this subject. And regarding those subject matter, that Adolf Hitler is not the only person to have displayed anti-Semitism during this period. He even mentions in this book the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Of course, hopefully by now, everyone realizes that book was a forgery. And if I'm correct, and again, anyone can correct me on this in the comment section, you can check on this, that the book was pretty much a forgery by certain Russian elements. But in this case, again, anti-Semitism in Europe is rather broad. He was not, as I said, Hitler was not the only person, was not the first person to invent anti-Semitism. He certainly did not invent it, and he certainly was not as articulate on the subject matter, and that's another thing that is important with this book. In this comparison stage, if you were reading this again, you will find more discussions on policy with Russia, references to England. There's another thing also, he wants alliances. This is one thing that Hitler was also seemed to be very, very enthralled with, an alliance with England and Italy, which of course makes some sense because the fascist leader Mussolini had taken over Italy, so it makes some sense in reference to that. That would be, from a rational perspective, maybe even for sea trade or for establishing trading routes with a former southern colony or southern empire towards warm water ports in the Mediterranean. I could understand that as a policy if you were dealing it strictly as a matter of foreign policy. So furthermore, it goes on in the book, when you read it, it mentions Russia. Again, this is a period in time where the Russian Communist Party, or in this case the Soviet Union, had been established or was being established at that time that he wrote the book. By the time he comes to power in the 1930s, of course, the Russian Civil War had been completed or had been fought. Again, it also had many international players. At a later date, perhaps we can discuss or get involved with that. But he again mentions there's no love of the Russians. He describes the Soviet leadership as criminals and pretty much vagabonds and usurpers of Russia, and then also goes into describing about the expansion of Germany, or expansion of the German Reich into lands in Eastern Europe. And as I said beforehand, this is important because when you are reading about the fourth element of the German policy, and this is where I found something interesting, he describes that the only way that Germany could survive or could thrive because of its land mass would be to seize territory in Europe. He specifically does not want to take territory, or did not seek a colonial establishment, because I guess he was under the impression that if he wanted to seek colonial establishment outside of Europe, that it would clash with both French as well as British policy. That was interesting, and I did find that rather curious. He realizes that Germany is not powerful enough to tackle the British fleet. He realizes that, and nor is it big enough to tackle the French fleet at that time, even though it was after the First World War. He also realizes that Germany is weak politically in reference to there and in reference to the United States. This is also important because he also has a very, very good affinity for Woodrow Wilson, which of course these days Mr. Wilson's policies are also well known here in the United States, about that he would not support any anti-lynching legislation here in the United States. But again, I don't want to digress. We're making a strict comparison to the book. That's something for a later date. Furthermore, when discussing the book, the policy also that he has for internally for German people is very, very interesting. Talks about extensively about the health, establishing exercise regimen, education for children as well as teenagers and adults. These are very important because because Mein Kampf is a book that is dealing with as a political manifesto. In that regard, it also does some extreme jumps in reference to German history. Again, it's a very deep subject. I will not broach it here on this because I have a limited amount of time. But I don't want you to think if you are reading the book that to leave out any confusion here. He is not. He's a very the book is very disjuncted. It really promotes a program of policies of education, promotes that policy of economic restoration of Germany, but it really doesn't discuss any particular references to how to establish the German state. And what I mean by that is that it doesn't tell anyone, if you were reading it, it doesn't give you any history of industrialization, what Germany's people do, what specifically in the north or south of the country, because there's a difference between the two, difference between segments or sectors of Germany. He doesn't talk about how they integrate the economy. He actually speaks rather loathsomely about the idea that the German policy was economic and it didn't build up its military fast enough. And he talks about that, but in this case, even still, contradiction, because prior to Hitler taking power in Germany, the German state had actually started its arms manufacturing. The Krupp, again, more history, which we will delve in a later subject. In this regard, the comparison of the book, I don't find, again, he is a racist. So you're dealing with a man who does not like Jews. He has absolutely no love for black people in this case, although he doesn't mention blacks that much in the book. Although he does mention about France, another country that he absolutely loathes. And this is important, the deep loathing of the French. He mentions about negrification, strange word I don't know about France. Again, leaving out basic colonial history, that capital attracts labor. That's a strictly capitalist argument. If you have an expanding empire, you are going to attract people from the far rings of the empire, from the far reaches of that empire, strictly as an economic basis. We are finding that here in the United States, and it's cultural dynamic as well. People from the poorer sections of the empire are going to come to where they can make money. That's the nature of migration. So he seems like he doesn't understand this in the book. Doesn't seem to point that out. He has no love of migratory policy in this. So I just thought that would be it'll be helpful for anyone who's reading this book to take that into account. There also is no history, as I mentioned, of the Aryan people. Even though he talks about Aryan culture and he talks about Aryan people, he doesn't tell you where they're from. Gives you no distinct map or any idea or trace or table of contents. As a matter of fact, if you're reading the table of contents, you will find that there. As I said, I will not quote directly from the book because I don't know the policies of YouTube or any other personnel if you're listening to this, and I will avoid quoting the book directly on that subject matter because, again, it would be maybe you're promoting the book. And I certainly, although am telling you about the book, I don't want to be a person who be confused as promoting the idea of fascism or Nazism. As I said before, this book is partially about establishing the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or the NSA, or the NSDAP, excuse me, NSDAP, excuse me. This is about the establishment of that party as a vehicle in Germany at that time. He also, in the book, does display why he adopted part of the reason of the swastika and the colors of the swastika, because the colors red, black, and white represent the imperial German flag. And he also expresses why he chose the red as a way of